clap. Okay, difficult text today. Before we start the text, I just wanted to add my grain of salt on the immigration debate. Just one word, based on what we were talking about the last time of the Beatitudes. I think the wisdom of Jesus was to balance justice with mercy. And I think when it comes to this immigration debate, yes, you guys were on the side of justice and the women were on the side of mercy. And I think a balance between the two is the ideal, right? It's both a Jewish and a Christian idea. So just meditate on that. And yes, we need laws, we need, whatever, but also we need humane treatment of human beings to the best of our abilities. That's my grain of salt on that. Okay. All right, Ephesians. I'm looking at your text first, your reading assignments. So Gubin, very well, good text analysis. You cut the important submit to one another before. This is fundamental. We're going to talk about this, right? So the whole section on submission it starts there with a mutual submission, right? So we're going to talk about that. Davidov, yes, problematic. God is the man, woman is the church, so immediate hierarchy. But is it, right? We've studied a lot the type of partnership we have between humans and God, especially in the book of Genesis. You have quite a bit of reciprocity and almost equality, right? So perhaps I can translate here, right? Remember, this is a Jew, so he's speaking not like the pagans where God is way up there and human beings are slaves, right? He's speaking within the Jewish context where you have a kind of covenant marital relationship already, where there is a very strong voice given to the human being, right? Compared to pagan nations, right? So do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about that in my thing. Felt like it might have been a bit of a stretch, especially in the later schism of Christianity into in the Gnostic position. But then I guess it's unfair to.
Yeah, he's very Jewish there actually, because this notion of marital relationship reflecting the God-Israel relationship is already common knowledge in Judaism, right? So he's just taking over a metaphor which was already very Jewish, right? So it shouldn't be too, and in the context of Judaism, there is an equal partnership. So you should then translate it that way, right? So this is not, if he was translating from the Greek, it would be a problem where the gods are, controlling everything and human beings are just submitted, right? Okay, now, yes, this is something we need to understand about Paul. And why? So a lot of you were complaining that, yeah, it's still very patriarchal. However, we're going to interpret it, still the man still has a stronger position, right? Whatever. So, and he's still talking about submission woman. I want you to be very aware of this technique that Paul uses. Paul starts out where the people are, and then he flips it, right? And we're going to see that today. So of course, in the Greek context, just so you know, and I'm sure if I mentioned Aristotle, right? When we did Eve, mentioned that. So in the Greek context, it was common knowledge, obvious that women should submit to men. So he starts there. Everybody's like, okay. And then gradually you will see what he's doing is actually flipping the paradigm. So that's a very common practice with Paul. And that's why he's often misunderstood. For example, when he says, I wish that everyone would be unmarried as I am, right? And then people interpret, we shouldn't get married. Paul says, we shouldn't get married. No, Paul is talking to a bunch of ascetic people. And he's saying, hey, I get it. I'm like you, actually. And then he flips it, right? So over and over again, you see that with Paul. And people, the problem with people is they read an intelligent text unintelligently. So you cannot be dumb and understand Paul. It's just that you can be dumb and understand Jesus. Yes, that he's very simple. He speaks very simply. Paul doesn't speak simply. Paul speaks like somebody like Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard has the same problem. He starts out and then he flips it. So to really understand Paul, you have to see where he's going along his audience. You have to know who he's speaking to, because he will start there and then little by little he will flip it on its head and bring them into completely new territory. So that's an exegetical tool for Paul that needs to be known if we're going to read him accurately. So, okay, Lam, yes, you mentioned Genesis, contradiction. Actually, we'll see there are connections. So we'll see that. So good point. Watson, the life by the, where are you? That's you. The life by the Spirit in the context of Paul is not a separate life from the body. It's a life where the body is infused by the Spirit, right? Paul is not a Greek. I know people would like to say he's a Greek. He's not a Greek, he's a Hebrew. And in the Hebrew context, the material realm is where God, we find God by living in a certain way in the material realm. You don't escape the material realm to connect to God. So when he's talking about the life of the spirit, he's talking about the body being animated by the spirit. So that's never leaving the body, right? Okay. You mentioned the sacrifice of Jesus, which let me not get into that. Nicolopoulos, where are you? There you are. So you talk about love, yes, love, but it's not an emotion here. It's something very, very difficult. We're going to look at that, right? And then Akbashev, as usual, great reading until at the end you refuse to. It's very interesting with you. You really understand, and then there's like always a moment where you're like, nah. So you might want to work on that. Exactly. But
He flips the paradigm.
does, yes.
So you have to
Stop
read the
it.
intelligent, you have to read the intelligent text intelligent.
Very well.
Maybe what you want them in the
No,
situation.
but it's not just what I want. You have a very, very deep, authentic reading of these texts. You're very good. You catch on very well. I'm always impressed. And then at the end, you're like, nah, it's not possible. Okay, that's fine. You know, Levinas was like that too. Levinas, a Jewish philosopher from the 20th century, very, very close to Christianity in his talking about sacrifice and so forth. You always find him on the brink of tumbling over into Christianity, and then he like pulls himself back. He's like, but of course it's not like that, blah blah blah. So it's a common symptom. Go ahead.
I do it because I understand that the New Testament is written, it's a continuation of the old one. So I give it
You do well.
the understanding that, okay, so we have the precursor and now we have the new parts, but then I realize this also has to be a separate text.
Yes.
And then I analyze it as a separate text and I'm like, as a separate text, it doesn't make sense on its own.
Got it.
So that's why I give my
Yeah, it's
Jewish
fine.
feedback.
You can totally do that. Good. And then you were completely happy with the text. So right? I saw in general you were quite in harmony with the text. Just the part maybe we have to look at. Yeah, you mentioned, okay, why do the wives submit and not the husbands, right? So we're going to talk about that. There's something very, very profound going on actually in the text once we read it in the proper translation, which is what we're going to do. Okay, good. So let's get into the text. So there's two problematic things that have happened with this text. And the most problematic thing actually is the way it was translated. So I'm going to actually go into proper translation. And then we'll look at I have just a number of points all mixed up, but should start to open things up a little bit for you. Okay, so in the original, whatever, your translations in general, we have the imperative. So we're looking at the bad translation now, okay? Wives, submit to your husbands. Jot this down. This is not what's written, but that's what's written in our translations. There is an imperative, right? Wives, submit. This is the imperative form. Wives, submit. Imperative, it's a command in the way that it's written in the translation. And all of you will have that same translation, I'm pretty sure. Nobody would dare translate as it was actually written in this context. So wives, submit to your husband, right? And then the next line, as the church submits to Christ, again, so also wives should submit. Again, then we have the command, should submit, which is not in the original. Okay, blah, 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 continues, the man, etc. And then you have towards the end, each one must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. And this is again a mistranslation. This part, the wife must respect her husband, is not translated correctly. You got the 3 points? Yes, everybody? So like the church submits to Christ, wives should submit to their husbands. It's a little more nuanced than that. But you have twice, it seems you have twice the command, imperative for the wife to submit. Yes.
That's just one point or two.
This is all the same point, but in 3 parts. And then, so twice it says wife submit, which is not in the original really, at least with nuance. And the last point is the wife must respect her husband. It's not the actual translation. Okay. All right. So based on that, of course, we have all kinds of abuses and problems right? Where the woman now, and we have problems even where women are abused in the relationship and they're told to submit to the husband as to the Lord. It's incredible, right? It's a very dangerous passage. Once it's translated like that, it becomes free reign for all kinds of abuses, which is actually what's happening still today, right? So, and of course, Paul, looks like an idiot. Okay, which he isn't, obviously. So we're going to look now at how it was actually written. All right. So if you go to, we can look already in our section. We have to look, the passage doesn't start there. It starts earlier, and we have to start earlier to get the full thing. So let's go to Ephesians 5. I'm on my phone because that's where I have my Bible today. Okay, Ephesians 5, and the actual section. So he talks about different things, and then he gets, see, at least this one did. Can I see? Because they separate different passages, and I'm curious where they separate. This is King James? Great. All right. Okay, see that? Awesome. Yeah, it's perfect. King James version, the most reliable version, right? In general, is the best translation. But look at this here. They separate in little sections, the editors, right? They give little titles. And so, can I use your Bible? Okay, great. So, yeah. So there's a section, walk in love, walk in light, walk in wisdom, and then marriage. Oh, that's in the next chapter, children and parents. Unbelievable. Hold on, is that the case here? Yes, okay. And then in the next chapter, you have children and parents, bondservants and masters, right? So they separate it, and the way they separate it is very problematic because the passage starts, all go with me, chapter 5, verse 15. This is where the actual passage starts, right? See that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. And this is where the section starts, right? Now, I'm going to read it the way that it should be. Actually, this is a good translation. This is perfect. Up until the wife section. I knew it. Okay, the King James is excellent. Please go, if you're on your phone, go to the King James, if you can. King James version of, or you don't have to, I'll just read it, right? So verse 17. So this is the same. Don't be unwise, understand what the will of God is. Do not be drunk with wine. And then there's a series of what we call participles, ing verbs, okay? So they say, but be filled with the Spirit. That's the first imperative, be filled with the Spirit. That's the beginning. And then you have a series of ing verbs. Participles. So it says speaking to one another in psalms, singing and making music, giving thanks, and then submitting to one another out of the fear of God. All of this, right, is the result of being filled with the Spirit. Make sense? So far, so good. So now notice there's the notion of submitting to one another in the fear of God. And then from there, you have a series of relationships that are described. You have wife and husband, children and parents, slaves and masters. So all of that is under this title, submitting to one another, because right after that, it's like you have a list of what this looks like in these different relationships. You follow me? So the text, we've narrowed down wife submit to your husband, but actually we are in the context, this is my first point, we are in the context of mutual submission. Every single one of these relationships, and it's not just wife and husband, it's children and parents, slaves and masters, are to be understood in the context of mutual submission. You follow me? Now, this in itself is completely crazy because the Greeks understood that wives should submit to husband, but they never understood husband should submit to wife. That's what it means when it says that submitting to one another, boom, 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 that implies that all these relationships ought to be qualified by mutual submission. You follow? So the Greeks were okay with 3 types of submission: wife to husband, children to parents, slaves to masters. But what we have here is a flip. Paul is saying, no, yeah, sure, wife to husband, but husband to wife. Yeah, sure, children to parents, but also parents to children. And finally, sure, slave to master, but also master to slave. If you read, that is what is actually going on. Do you follow how he's being extremely radical here? This is unheard of in Roman society, where the man was the pillar of strength and everything else was submitted to him, right? The household husband, right? The husband in the household was the only one who Everything else was submitted to him in the Greek household. Here, Paul is saying, no, the context is mutual submission. All of these relationships have to change. You follow that? Any questions? That's my first observation, right? Based on this. So that's the global structure, okay? Now, we're going to go deeper. Let's go into the actual text on the wife. So we just read in verse, what is that verse? 21, yeah. Submitting to one another in the fear of God. And then in the Greek, it says simply this, wives, to your husbands. It never says wives, submit to your husbands. It says wives, it implies it comes from them, so that those sentences are connected. Submitting to one another, wives to your husbands, and then we expect something like husbands to your wives, but then he goes into a different direction, right? So you follow what I'm saying? So there's never the actual imperative, wives, submit to your husband. It is actually the result of being filled with the Spirit. You see? Watch the sentence again. Be filled with the Spirit, speaking in hymns, singing, giving thanks, submitting to one another, wives to your husbands, da 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 da. This is all like, it's not a command, it's a result of mutual submission and being filled with the Spirit. You follow? So that for sure, I want to be very clear. There is no imperative, wives submit. It is implied that because there is mutual submission, because everyone is filled with the Spirit in this proper context, the wives will naturally, spontaneously submit, right? But it's not an imperative. Everything else, however, is an imperative. Husbands love, children obey, fathers do not tempt, slaves obey, masters do not, there's something with masters too. It's all imperatives, okay? So this is the only one that's not an imperative. Let's stop on that because this is very profound. We're talking about all these relationships. The wives to the husband is the only one that doesn't have the imperative, that there's no command. It's what do you think Paul is saying here by not making it an imperative? Saying, okay, they will not submitting to one another, wives to their husbands, da 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 da. And you hear, then you're waiting to hear husbands to their wives, children to their fathers, fathers to their children, slaves to their master. That's the rhythm, right? So what is going on here? Why is he not giving an imperative for the woman to submit to the man?
Maybe it's going on the implication of the Old Testament, the rules of the Old Testament. It's saying wives to the husbands and everything that comes from the Old Testament that follows with it.
What do you mean?
We have the interpretation of how relationships should be from the Old Testament between a father and a son, a mother and a son. So it's not just the child, parents, man and woman, slave and master, man and animal. So he's saying one part of it and saying everything else that you have already known should follow as well.
Right. I mean, he's clear, right? He does give details how, but absolutely, right? This is not departing at all, right? Obviously from the Hebrew Bible, he's not trying to do that, right? So what will be another reason why there's not a specific, why the woman is the only one not receiving an imperative? Like all the others had an imperative. Why is she not receiving an imperative? It's a participle. Yes?
Maybe it's because of the sublimation of women. Women were like thrown up like in not that I agree with, but women were thrown in a lesser position, and then women cannot make it the way men can make it. Maybe, I don't know.
Okay, you're on the right track. Yeah.
I guess the woman kind of carry that atmosphere of like things will somehow, some way come back to the order of like the woman. I don't know, like, you know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
throughout all those different, slaves that are not, it's like all of that will somehow lead back to the atmosphere a woman kind of has that a man would somehow.
I would agree in a matriarchal context, but we're in a patriarchal context, right? So the woman is the man who is the center of the household in the patriarchal context, right? So that's already important to remember, because then we'll see what he does with the man. And it's going in the direction that you're going to say, actually, but for the man. So the man is the center. Mutual submission. Why is everyone gets a command except the woman? What would happen if there was, I think I mentioned that. What would happen if there was a command, women submit to your husband as to the Lord? What would happen if it was written like that?
Isn't it already like that with the whole Adam and Eve thing?
No,
not?
we
Oh.
studied. Come on, don't you remember what we talked about with Genesis 3:16? Go back to your notes. Yes.
He's talking to the Gentiles, I'm assuming that he's leaving it out in the air so that nobody can give it that concrete, like, yes, wife should be submitted to the husband. It should be expounded on, should be.
Yeah,
both
there's
time.
there's a gap here, right? And there's also it's not a command. There's no command. See, this is what's crazy. There is no command for the wife to submit to the husband. It is a natural, it is a sub. She is doing it in the context of mutual submission, being filled with the Spirit. It happens organically. So he's describing what could happen if everyone was filled, but there is never an actual command. This is really important. Yes. Exactly. If there is a command, women submit to your husband, first of all, it's not biblical because we studied Genesis 2, right? Where woman is supposed to be against the man at times. She's supposed to not submit at times. So why? So Paul is aware of that, obviously. So but he's talking to Greeks, so he has to be tactful. So he says submission is natural, organic result of all of us being filled with the Spirit. So he's not saying women shouldn't submit. He can't do that. We can't say women shouldn't submit to God, to man. He's not gonna. The Greeks are not able to absorb that, right? But he's gonna say the submission of women is an organic thing that happens when everyone is filled with the Spirit. But I will not command it because of the risks of abuse. You follow? Everybody sees what I'm saying? Am I clear? Okay, so we have that, right? And the second part also is the same. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, and this is the good translation, so let the wives to their own husbands. Again, the word submit is not used here, right? So twice we have put submit in different translations, actually not there. There's a kind of space here, right? Given, and it's really in the context of when this is all taking place, women will naturally yield to their husbands. It is an organic result of everyone being filled with the Spirit, etc., etc. Okay, all right. So far, so good. So we have this. Now, let's go a little deeper. Let's go into the last verse about respect, which is, yes, verse right before chapter 6, verse 33. Let each one of you love his own wife as himself. And then again, it's a mistranslation, and the wife should respect her husband. In the Greek, it says literally this: let each one of you love his wife as himself, in order that his wife might respect him. Do you see the difference here? Let him love her that she might respect him. In other words, her respect is conditional on how he loves her. Let him love her that she might end up respecting him. It's not let him love her and she needs to respect him. No, she will respect him to the degree that he knows to love her. Please then love your wives that she might respect you. You see the difference? This is a conditional. This is not an imperative. So you see the translators obviously are very uncomfortable with all this, right? And they're, remember, most translators of the Christian Bible are heavily influenced by Greek thought. So obviously they're going to, first of all, they have the bias. They don't know Hebrew thought, most of them. They barely know anything about the Hebrew context of Paul. So they don't know about the Ezer Kenegdo that we studied in Genesis 2. So with the Greek lens, you're uncomfortable with this. Well, what do you mean there's no command? Of course there should be a command. Let's make it clear. Let's have order in the family here, right? So that's the two mistranslations, right, that I wanted to point out. Any questions or pushback or any discomforts with anything I mentioned? Okay, now it's still the implication of submitting. So we have to address that, right? Okay, so we have to look, this mutual submission, what does it look like? And that's where we turn to the husband. What does it look like for him to submit?
On right back.
Yes. So let's look at the text. Now look at what the husband, so now it's an imperative. There's no discussion. The husband has to love their wives. Now everyone, I mean, I have never seen this because I always also associate love with emotion, like you, right? Oh, no, husbands should love their wives. Yes, that's nice. They do. And, you know, people will say, but I do love my wife. But let's look at what that looks like. Let's look at what that looks like. He explained, as Christ loved the church, gave himself up for her, meaning sacrificed himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her. So the way that he shows love is by being sacrificial towards her. Now, what does that mean when you're sacrificial towards someone?
Put there.
Okay, that's a form of submission, right? So in essence, right, we are in the context clearly of mutual submission, just like the woman, she's not ordered to, but there is the notion that she will naturally yield to the man when these conditions are met. The man, on the other hand, there is no conditions, there is no terrain. It is a command to love the woman sacrificially like Christ loved the church, right? So that doesn't look too easy either. If I was a man, I would be I would be fleeing from this passage, right? So that's, okay, so that's the second thing, right? So we do see here, if you start to really read closely, that there is a notion of mutual submission. The woman yields to the man in the right context, in the context that is spirit-filled. I want to be very clear about that, because we have been told to yield to the man in any old context, because he's the man, right? But here it's very clear, the context of the woman's yielding to the man is a spirit-filled life in both partners. Outside of that context, the yielding will not take place and doesn't have to. That's what I'm reading here, right? It is a spirit-filled context where both are filled with the spirit, the hardcore believers, right? Not just believers intellectually, they're filled with the spirit, they are filled with the presence of God. In that context, the yielding will occur, right? But outside of that context, not only it will not occur, but it should not occur. Because if a woman yields to a man who is evil, this is catastrophic, and it goes against the original blueprint of creation, where the woman is supposed to stand up in situations where there is an evil. Do you see the connection between this text and Genesis 2? Everybody following? Okay. Now, it's interesting that when you look at the text structurally, you will notice that the center of the text, anybody capture what the center of this whole segment, starting with living by the Spirit all the way to the slaves? What is the center of the text? If you do a little bit of a word count, you will hit on it right away. Yes, but it's still the same. They put up arbitrarily the distinctions, but it's still in the same context of, it's all the dyads that have to mutually submit, right? So this is all the same text, right? Which later was artificially distinguished, and we lost the original thrust of the text, right? So what's the center? Can anyone tell me? Going from this verse, so from chapter 5, verse 15, all the way to chapter 6, all the way to the end of I can't read, 9. What's the center? Yeah. Look at the text. You're not looking at it. You're answering without looking at the text. What do you see, those of you who are looking at the text? Pashev is the only one looking at the text, and I stole your Bible. Open your Bibles. You have your Bibles. Open your Bibles and start looking. Where is the center of the text? Yeah.
Earlier we were talking about this, the holy number 3, the Trinity between man, woman, and God. It's also giving the same holiness of man, woman, and then it brings in the child. The idea of the blueprint.
Yeah.
That you mentioned before, to get married and to have children.
Okay, yeah, no, of course, that's Genesis 1, 2, Genesis, yeah. The slaves is not quite part of the blueprint, is it? little hick there. Genesis 1 and 2. But I'm not looking quite for that. I'm looking for a word count. Count and find me the center of the text. Let's do some work here. Yes.
Ephesians 5.
So I'm starting Ephesians 5. So the section starts Ephesians 5:15. And then this whole section, of course, it ends Ephesians 6:9. Okay. So just do me a rough evaluation of the center of the text based on the word count. Where is that? What verse is that? So you can count the total verses and then divide it by 2 and tell me where we end up. Am I supposed to do it 2? Okay. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Center. I'll believe you. I'll take your word for it.
13, so.
Yeah,
No, not 28, 29.
29, sure. For no one ever hated his own flesh, etc. So we are in the section of the husband's love, right? If you look structurally of the passage, it is the husband's love that is at the center of the passage. And it makes sense because husband's love represents Christ's love, right? In the context of Christianity, that's the most important. So it's very interesting that in this passage on mutual submission, the author is highlighting the sacrificial love of the husband to the wife. Why? Because this is unheard of in the Greek culture. The husbands had no duty to love their wives, right? They had duty maybe to support their wives or whatever, but everyone was submitted to the husband. So this idea of sacrificial love is completely unusual, right? And so that is why the author here is situating it at the center, right? This is the centerpiece of the text. The husband represents Christ in the sense, not in the sense that he rules over the wife, but in the sense that he dies for her daily, right? That's the idea that he says here, right? So again, very powerful emphasis on the mutual submission of the human couple, right? Okay, now, already we're starting to see the text is not as we thought it was. Let's look now at let's go deeper and look at the word submit, what it means in Greek. So in Greek, upotasso, U-P-O, I don't feel like getting up, U-P-O-T-A-S-S-O. U-P-O-T-A-S-S-O, upotasso is the word to submit.
Is what? If you don't know what?
Upotasso is to submit in Greek. U-P-O-T-A-S-S-O. Okay, now it's interesting because some translations, they translate wives obey your husbands. In fact, the marriage vow, yes? What's the traditional marriage vow? What does it say to the woman? Y'all don't have this one, do you? This tradition in sickness and in health till death do us part. What does it say to the wife? Different. Obey, right?
You, it's,
I promise
I
to
promise to obey and love
and love
and cherish.
and cherish. And the husband, what does he promise?
I think it's supposed to be the same.
Obey?
In current day, it's the
I
same.
gotta see this. I gotta see this. Okay, let's look at the
I don't
marriage,
think-
traditional marriage vows. Because it's based on this, right? So traditional
Yes,
marriage vow.
I think it,
Today, of course, they're gonna make it like that, but
I vow
um,
to,
To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for
Okay, go
richer,
ahead.
for poor, sickness and in health, for love and cherish, till death do us part.
that's the husband.
As both.
Where's the obey? There was
maybe
obey
should
there,
be obey. I
but
think
surely
it
the
was
husband
in
not
there.
supposed to obey them.
I Blaine take thee to be my wedded wife slash husband, to have and to hold from this day forward. And just goes on.
Because the obey, I doubt that the bride would object to saying, yeah. So the bride is saying love, honor, and obey. I think initially there was this notion of obedience, right? Which of course I doubt the husband was saying that. It's like there's no universe where the husband would be saying that, right? Except here, maybe. So there's often the understanding of submission like obey, but actually the word obey is found a little later in the passage, akuo in Greek, for the slave and the child, but not for the wife. It's a different word, right? So obedience is not implied here. You see it?
Yeah, it's, okay. So the grooms is I blank take thee to be wedded, to be my wedded wife and to have and hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poor, in sickness and health, and to love and cherish till death do us apart according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I pillage thee by troth. And then the wife's is I take thee to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold for this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poor, for sickness and health, to love, to cherish, and to obey.
Exactly.
Till death do us apart.
There we go. That's coming from here, right? That's coming from here, a translation of submission as obedience. But they add the word obey in
Yeah,
the love
it-
and
this
cherish.
website actually even references Ephesians.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so this is a very important passage, right? So obedience is not used here. Obedience is used in the next few passages when it comes to children, which is the Greek word, if you're interested, upakuo, U-P-A-K-O-U-O. That's the actual word for obey, U-P-A-K-O-U-O. And that's used for the children, for the slaves, but not for the wife. It's upotasso for the wife. Okay, now upotasso, we have to understand, what does it mean exactly? So we first go to the Greek context, right? We're going to see, okay, is Paul thinking like a Greek? And then we'll go to the Hebrew context, which I think is the real context, we should look at this. So Greek context, upotasso is usually in the military context. If you look at a military context, it simply means the troops, it's the act of arranging troops in a structured way, put them in formation. Okay, so it looks like the man is kind of, his wife is like kind of soldiers that you have to put in formation, right? Yes. That's upotasso, right? So that's in the military context. Non-military context, in the tense that it is in here, upotasso is it's in the middle passive tense. It implies of
Tenth of Yaakov, maybe, in comparison to the tenth of Jacob in Judaism.
what?
Would that compare to the tenth of Jacob for instance, in Judaism?
What do you mean the 10th of Jacob?
Oh, yeah, you would say Matovu, Matovu is the prayer in Judaism, we talk about the tenth of Jacob.
But no, this is not relating to Jacob. Yeah, there's no mention here. So okay, other meaning would be yielding, right? Cooperating, taking responsibility. So okay, in Greek it's interesting. It connects to what we're used to hearing. The woman should yield, right? Okay, obviously, yes. All right. But when you look at the Hebrew context, slightly different, and it becomes very, very interesting, actually. So how do I look at the Hebrew context? Well, let's remember, what kind of Bible was Paul using when when Paul is reading the Hebrew scriptures, which book is he using when he's talking to Greeks? So so remember, the Jews at the time were Hellenistic Jews. They all knew very well the Bible in Greek. Does anybody know the name of that Bible in Greek? There's a special name, the Septuagint, right? So Paul is very well versed in the Septuagint, right? He knows, of course, the Hebrew scriptures, but because he's also thinking in Greek and talking to a Greek audience, he's well read in the Septuagint. So we need to understand upotasso, not from the Greek context, but from how it is understood in the Septuagint. You follow? Because that's where Paul is coming from. He's not coming from the Greek context. He's coming from the Hebrew scriptures in translation. And so whatever we see here with upotasso, when we go to the Septuagint and look for how it is used there, we might get a very different meaning, especially when we go to the Hebrew original, right? That's what I want to do. You follow what I'm doing? Because remember, Paul is not thinking like a Greek. I maintain this. He's thinking like a Hebrew and thinking in the context of the Hebrew scriptures, albeit in their Greek translation, right? Okay. So this is something interesting that I noticed. I did a word search of upotasso in the Septuagint, and I fell on two passages in the Psalms, which both translated the same. So I want you to look at Psalm 37. I never put the verse. I don't know why I prepare like that. Okay, so let's go to Psalm 37. You can later look at the Greek, but we can look at it in the Hebrew because that will help. So and we can also look at it in English. It works just as fine. So Psalm 37, and I have to find the verse for you right now. So give me a second. Okay, blah, blah, blah. There it is, 7. Psalm 37, verse 7. Yes? So the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. And Paul is very well acquainted with that scripture because he is living in the context of Greek culture. So he's quoting, he knows it, he reads it in the Greek and so forth. So my point is that he is using the word upotasso with the Septuagint in mind, how it is used there. You follow? Does that make sense? Yes, everybody with me? Okay, so let's look at Psalm 37:7. This, can someone read me the first 2 lines? Verse 7, yeah.
Wait for him.
Okay, wait.
Wait for the Lord and hope for him. Do not compete with one
Good.
whose ways prosper with a man who
All
executes
right.
malicious plans.
What do you have?
I was gonna say rest in the Lord.
Yes, better. King James? I'm starting to really love the King James, guys. It's really, if you want to read it, it's the closest to the Hebrew each time. It's wonderful. I'm impressed. Yeah, it's actually that. What did you say? Rest. Rest, or even more specifically, be still before the Lord and wait patiently for it. Be still in the Hebrew, dom, D-O-M, be silent. That's the word. Be still, silent in the sense of not shut your mouth, but in the sense of resting and trusting and waiting, right? Hypotasso is the Greek translation of be still. Of course, it's in a different tense than it's actually hypotagethi, but that's irrelevant. It's the same word. So in this context, right, hypotasso has the connotation in the Septuagint of resting, being still, waiting, right? Trusting. That's the connotation. Not submitting. I mean, it's a form, you can see it as submitting, but the text dom is silent. Be restful before God, right? Okay. And then you have the same Psalm 62 verse 5. Can someone read that? Psalm 60, same word again, hypotasso. Psalm 62 verse 5. What do you have? The first one who has it, just read it. Yes, go ahead.
Soul wait silent for God.
Exactly. Same thing, domi, right? It's an imperative. Be silent, my soul, before God, right? So okay, so this changes a little bit the meaning of hypotasso. It's not yield, it's not surrender, obey. It's the connotation of trust and rest, right? And I find that extremely beautiful personally, right? Because this is a beautiful act of love when the woman is capable of resting and trusting in the man, right? That he will come through somehow at some point, hopefully, right? So it's not about I'm going to obey and do whatever you say. It's about I trust that you'll come through for me, right? And I rest in you. And as a response, the sacrificial love, right? Notice the connection with Genesis 3:16. Her love for her husband, and he rules through her. Remember, that's how we translated it. And now it is, right, her rest in her husband, and he loves her sacrificially. They're connected. To the degree that a woman knows how to rest in the husband will love her sacrificially. And to the degree that the man knows to love her sacrificially, she will be able to rest in him. That's the dynamic I'm seeing, which is absolutely not hierarchical. We have lost the hierarchy here. This is a mutual act of love where I rest and trust you, even though sometimes I'm really scared what you're going to do next, right? Like I do not know where this is going, but I rest in you and I trust in you. And this is so empowering to the man. We do not realize as women how empowering it is to a man when we trust him. It is the most powerful act of love a woman can give a man is to trust him, right? Because that is the most difficult because we know better. Obviously, we know exactly what he should do, what he should be doing and when, but to kind of like refrain, right? And just be like, you know what? I trust you. You got this. Just, I'm good. I'm waiting, right? And that is the most empowering thing for the man, right? And the man also, as he loves the woman sacrificially, he inspires this kind of restfulness and trust in her, right? It works together. And when you translate it to God, it's even more beautiful, right? As we rest in God, he acts for us. Remember, we talked about this all semester. As we stop doing, God can fight, right? As long as we're fighting, God cannot fight, right? God fights to the degree, he fights for us to the degree that we know to rest in him and trust in him. It's the same dynamic, right? So the man-woman relationship is a kind of a mirror of the God-human relationship, right? And that's why it's so sacred for the Apostle Paul, right? Okay, yes, go
I
ahead.
just had a question from what you put down. So you said it has military context in the house.
So in the Greek context, which I don't think Paul is, right? Paul is coming from the Hebrew context, but in the Greek context, you have the notion of, the officers that, so you have the commander who arranges the troops in a certain formation, right? The Greeks fought in different form. So that's the military. Then you have the normal average Greek context where it means to yield, to cooperate, which is a little better. But I believe Paul is thinking in Hebrew, right? And so I go back to the Hebrew Bible where hypotasso is used with the connotation of rest and trust. And that changes everything, right? In my view, right? What do you think? Did I redeem the text a little bit? I worked very hard on this. Very hard to redeem this text. Let me hear your feedback because this will help me fine tune my arguments, right? This is me again wrestling with the text as I was doing with Genesis 3:16, right? So tell me a little bit how you're receiving this. You're my worst opponent, so I'll start with you. Lam, how do you feel?
I think it's a good representation or a good understanding. I just wait, let me get clear what you're saying first.
Okay, good.
So you're saying that a woman ability to entrust and like step back from the man, I guess, and in return, he sacrifices for her.
So it inspires that, right? So,
Right.
and first of all, this rest is coming from context of mutual submission already. We know that, but we can also do it even with a difficult man, right? So, to the degree that we learn to trust him, like it's even if he's not trustworthy, to offer him that, right? To give him the grace of I'm gonna trust that you're gonna make it, right? That actually empowers that awakens love in the man. That really empowers him to act on our behalf. It's a psychological dynamic, right? So that is, and then the reciprocal is also true, that as the man learns to love sacrificially, he inspires rest, right? The woman can rest, of course, when she knows that he's loving, right? So it's a kind of a mutual thing. So there's no more hierarchy in this, in my view, in this kind of definition, because it's a grace you're giving the man. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to offer you I'm going to rest in you. I'm going to give you this as an act of love. And it's not like you're not submitting, you're not obeying. You're just saying, I trust you, you got this. Or you can even say, I'd love this to happen and I trust you can come through,
Yes.
right?
But technically, one could argue that the hierarchical, like, parallel is still there, but it's reversed now. Instead of when it said, oh, wife must submit to man, if we're going by your definition, then technically you could say technically men are submitting.
How so?
In the relationship that because our submission is on the basis of if they do something correctly.
No, it can be a grace also. In this context, yes, he says the wife he doesn't want to prescribe it for good reason, but we can take it as an act of love, right? I'm going further than Paul when I'm saying Paul is never going to say
He
submit.
doesn't command in
Yeah.
this situation, he doesn't command the submission, meaning he doesn't command the
Yeah.
trust in
No,
men.
no,
But he does command
Yes.
that men love
because
women,
he's flipping the script.
which
Yeah.
would technically mean that
Yes, you got it.
the hierarchical situation is
Is reversed.
women on top.
That's
and
what, and Paul, I think,
servants.
is intentionally doing that because in Rome, it was the exact opposite. So he's being hyperbolic, he's being extreme, right? He's forcefully reversing the paradigm. And now is the man who is surrendering to the woman, and the woman responds
For people.
when he does that, the woman responds, right?
Okay.
So he's saying, if you want your wives to surrender to you, this is how you gotta act. It's basically what he's saying, right? So yes, he's flipping it, but I'm going further when I'm saying, even if the man is not doing that, it is a very powerful, gracious act of love to still practice it because it inspires love in the
Yeah.
man, right? So I'm going further when I'm saying we ought to practice it as a grace if we choose to. See, that's why he doesn't give a command. We have to choose whether we will submit in that situation or not, because there are situations where we ought not to submit, right? And he's aware of that. That's why he flips it. Now it's the man who, to the degree that the man is sacrificial, the woman will naturally submit, or not submit, rest, right? So it's it's the exact opposite of how translators and commentators have read it. I believe where we are. You are seeing very correctly that Paul is flipping it, but he's very subtle, right? He's very careful because he's in Rome and nobody's ready for this, right? So you see how subtle he is, right? It sounds like he's agreeing with them, but if you really read it correctly, you see that he's actually flipping the paradigm. You absolutely got it. Anybody else? How are the men feeling? Curious. How are y'all feeling about this feminist interpretation? I'm not actually even doing it as a feminist. I'm reading the text. I believe I'm just reading what's written. Yes, go ahead.
Great interpretation. David actually looked at each other when you said that you should. Okay, so we have a rabbi called Rabbi Bachman, and gave a lecture once, and he said, "How do you know you're ready for a relationship?" He was going on, and he was, like an average Jew does. I'll give you $100 gift card for breakfast or whatever, and nobody seemed to answer it. And he said, "You know you're ready to love when you can put somebody else's needs before your own."
That's it.
So
Yeah.
when you said that, me and him looked at each other,
Yeah,
and we're like,
there we
that's like a very Judaic
Exactly. That's
response.
which we are in that
I
context.
still don't
Did
agree
that
with
answer
what
that
Paul's
question
saying.
correctly? Is that Julio that answered that question correctly? That answered that question. correctly.
yeah.
Congratulations, you're ready to get married.
Go ahead.
But also, it kind of like flips, I feel like, the way that most women act today.
Yeah, oh my
In that-
God.
In that, like,
Yeah.
it's hard to
Really
rest
hard.
in- like you have to be okay accepting love and like being taken care of by
Absolutely.
somebody else.
Absolutely,
When
yeah.
like the way that like we're brought up, especially nowadays, is like you're independent, you can do
Mhm.
everything, whatever.
Yep.
But it's like you have to actively take a step back and be like, somebody else can take care of you, and that's okay. And
You,
then
you hit a really interesting point. It's as hard for a woman to rest in a man as it is for a man to sacrifice for a woman. It's an act of sacrifice because we know exactly what to do. We don't need you. So we can fix this by ourselves. But the act of delegating, right? It's so because we're not even raised like this. We're raised to be strong, independent women who don't need men, right? So if there's something to be fixed in the house, I will do it myself. Literally, I will do it myself because you're too slow, right? So and we don't, and so there's no relationship, right? So the ability to delegate, right, that to the man is very powerful. It's as hard for us to rest in the man, I repeat, than it is for the man to sacrificially love the woman, right? It's both are profound, it's sacrifice, right? Yes, good point. Yes, go ahead.
Can you touch upon when the text mentions the wine? Like,
Yes.
why it talks about it like that?
I liked what you said in your paper, that it was in the context of drunkenness of Rome, Rome.
So good, but then you didn't read my last part well.
I did, that's when you start to flip again,
Because
like
it
Paul.
really, it doesn't make sense. I mean, I understand why you would say it to a group of Gentiles, but as if you are a Jew and you're spreading, the fulfillment of Jewish
Yeah.
prophecy, then you shouldn't be. I don't know. I don't understand.
Let-
why you
let's
should
remember that-
go against it.
Let's remember that Christian feasts included wine, right? So they were doing the kiddush, right? The blessing over the wine and the bread. They continued, Christianity has continued that tradition in different ways, but the wine was an essential aspect of Christian feasts and Christian celebrations. So
it's
not-
like taking communion is about.
that's what it is.
too.
It's the kiddush.
Yeah.
It's a kind of kiddush, right? That's what I've concluded, right? So though he's not bashing wine, he's talking about the drunkenness, the way the Romans were abusing the wine. Did you know that the Romans would drink, throw up, drink again, throw up, drink again? That's how they partied. Kind of like Americans, right? So not people in Queens.
There's culture, there's
Do
both
that.
immigrants.
Do we do that too? Okay,
Do that more than Americans.
maybe.
Europeans always laugh at Americans that
Yeah.
don't
Y'all
drink
don't know how to
as
drink.
much.
So that's what he's talking about. He's talking about this excessive, right? But of course, wine in a sacred context absolutely was a part of Christian, just like it is Jewish, and it had the same meaning, right? The same messianic, connotation and so forth.
Said preaching, don't, like he completely said, do not.
Don't get drunk, I think he's
Okay.
talking about. It's talking about really abusing. Yeah, don't get drunk.
Basically, everything
Because
in
we talked about,
moderation.
the
Other
thousands.
parts of the New Testament that it says, it doesn't. So it doesn't demonize drinking, but it speaks against drunkenness in the sense that
Yeah,
it wants you to be sober of mind.
Right, but he says, be filled with the spirit instead, meaning
yeah.
instead of, so what is he saying? What type of spirit? Vodka?
No, the Holy
The
Spirit.
Holy Spirit.
Like do drinking with like a air of holiness.
Yeah,
But he
yeah.
doesn't say that, he just says,
Spirituality.
don't do it, or else you'll be. a fool.
Because remember, this is
Says do it, when he says don't do it, the it is referring to extremity.
yeah,
It's either
that's it.
don't Fill
Yeah.
yourself up, don't drink, or like don't get
Yeah.
drunk.
Like moderate yourself,
Status of-
half alcohol,
Yeah.
half spirit, and then spirit, Holy Spirit, and then
The
okay.
it-
Very
the
good.
it That he's describing seems to be a status of excess. That might be.
All right, good. So we hopefully are feeling better about this text. Next time you will read Revelation 29 to 20. I'm sorry, 19 to there's no 29, 19 to 22, 19 to 22, and we will be talking about hell, whether it exists or not. And that will be it. So, and then I'll give you the test questions in the after class. So thank you. I will see you in a couple days.